One Piece has seen its characters go through the ringer, especially during the Wano arc. But because of that, they've also grown to dramatic new levels of power, and they're only gonna get stronger from here. One of the Straw Hats who has made massive leaps in power is our green-haired swordsman, Roronoa Zoro. Seeing as he's the number 2 of their crew, and a fan favorite, this video is going to both go over his amazing progression since his humble beginnings as the pirate hunter, and where it could possibly lead him by the end of the series. Without further ado, let's theorize our way to Laugh Tale and beyond. Where Zoro started. Seeing as we first discovered Zoro along with Luffy, tied up and left to starve for weeks, I think it's only fitting that we pick up from there. It's crazy to think his character arc started with him hunting down pirates to becoming one of them on the journey of a lifetime. But let's skip ahead a bit. From there, Zoro's dream and promise to dearly departed Kuina is revealed to us. He wants to become the strongest swordsman in the world. That same goal leads him to face off against Mihawk, quite prematurely, and risk his life for his belief in his skills and experience. Luckily, Mihawk saw something in him, so he spared his life. This allowed Zoro to vow to himself and Luffy that he would never lose again. This led him to a number of battles, most of which he won with not too much trouble. And eventually, he circles right back to where he began, Mihawk. During the 2-year training time for all the Straw Hats, Zoro found himself with the legendary swordsman, learning all he could so he would be strong enough once he reunited with his crew. I don't know about you, but I'd hope my teacher would give me a few less scars. Maybe even spare my eyesight. But oh well. Zoro did what he thought was necessary. Jumping now to the Punk Hazard arc, Zoro develops something of a precursor to the haki usage we see in Wano during his fight against Monet. With Tashigi struggling against her opponent, Zoro steps in to end the fight with a monstrous slash, scarring Monet to the point that she could barely keep her form together for more than a few seconds. The fear came mostly from knowing that if he'd used haki, she would have immediately died. Not that she survived the battle, but that's beside the point. This was just one of those demonic Zoro moments that hinted at what was coming for him in the future. Similar to how people like Kobe were terrified of his presence and reputation. In the New World, Zoro hadn't been severely injured for quite some time, even against people like Pika who dwarfed him in size and could move entire landscapes. It came down to a battle of haki. Not the Conqueror's one, but the other two kinds. And Zoro came out on top. He proved once again that his promise to never lose wouldn't be broken. Then things become much more difficult in Wano, and that promise seemed a bit harder to keep. We'll get to why that is in a moment, but before we do, make sure to subscribe with notifications on and smash that like button to awaken your own haki. Recent power-ups. As I was saying, Zoro already unlocked observation haki as well as armament haki, which allows him to create defensive armor around his body. It seems he learned this type through training with Mihawk. This armor covering is also called Ryo in Wano, which means flowing sakura. But those two aren't new. What came next during his battle against Kaido to protect an unconscious Luffy is what we're especially interested in, his newly acquired Conqueror's haki. This form is both extremely rare and immensely powerful when controlled and exerted properly. Most notably, Zoro was shown to injure Kaido's chest the same way Odin had in the past, by using Enma combined with Conqueror's haki. I don't think I need to stress just how impressive that is considering he was already heavily injured and exhausted by that point. He even tells Law he won't be of any use afterwards, and to take care of the rest for him. And that's when we get the amazing Demon Aura 9-sword style Ashura Blades Drawn Dead Man's Game. With a name that long, if it wasn't something spectacular, it would be a waste. Also, Zoro is one of the only non-captains to possess Conqueror's haki, along with Yamato and Katakuri, making it even more surprising for him to awaken it. This puts him in a different league than he was prior to the Wano arc. That's not the only thing Zoro showed off to us though. We also got a good look at how adaptable he is, both in terms of picking up techniques and using new weapons. If it weren't for his exchanging Shisui, one cursed sword, for the possibly even stronger one, Enma, Zoro might have had more difficulty in scarring Kaido, regardless of his Conqueror's haki. From the very moment he begins to use Enma, it tries to drain his will and life force. But Zoro is no pushover and fights back, even on the verge of death and seeing a Grim Reaper-like apparition ready to take him away. I'm sure you're wondering, like I am, what that was. We'll touch more on this entity later on. And finally, Zoro figured out how to replicate Foxfire style from watching Kinemon. No instruction required. Zoro executed this move most crucially against the Lunarian by the name of King, and managed to defeat him while severely injured. King, on the other hand, was completely uninjured at the beginning of their battle. Of course, it helped that he combined the use of Enma and Haki, but that's beside the point. He also used it against Kaido's Bolo Breath to keep the attack from reaching Luffy in midair. But this is just the beginning of what Zoro could do with these techniques. There are so many questions left unanswered and places the story could take him next. How he could get stronger. Without looking too deeply into which destinations or opponents could be next, since it's mostly unknown for the moment, let's dive into ways that Zoro's power-ups could come in handy for the Straw Hats' upcoming battles. Considering his extreme resilience and endurance in battle, even prior to the time skip, as he hadn't eaten for many days and still had energy to fight when he was freed, he could become a fearsome fighter who could battle a number of opponents without needing much of a break. This means that if they were to face an army of pirates or navy officers due to Luffy's awakening, Zoro would be an important asset to their crew. Not that he wasn't before, mind you. Zoro is no weakling either. He was able to redirect, if only for a moment, a combined attack from Big Mom and Kaido. It's possible he could face Emperor-level and Captain-level threats in the future again and defeat them this time. This, again, would be especially needed considering the order for Luffy's elimination and Nico Robin's capture, with both of them being deemed as threats in their own ways. But let's get back to Zoro. What those orders indicate is a whole lot of trouble on the way for the Straw Hats. Sure, it might be calm now, but I can't imagine it'll last long with the world government watching so closely. And because the trouble would require more improvements, I imagine Zoro will have to master certain techniques and any and all weapons in his possession. Seeing as how Zoro's swords, and a famous swordsman from Wano, had such a big impact on his growth in style, he might continue to try and study their secrets and abilities, and maybe even pick up some of the things Odin could do. I think that might prove to be difficult seeing as he no longer has any samurai around to watch and copy, nor are the Straw Hats still on the island, but it's a possibility nonetheless. There's also the fact that there was a pair of swords, one representing heaven and the other hell, and Zoro was given Enma, the darker of the two. I know it's highly unlikely, but there's a small chance that due to Momonosuke being a beginner swordsman, Zoro could use or borrow Ame no Hibakiri. It's probably not going to happen for a number of reasons though. One, Zoro and the crew have left the island, and Momo can't really leave right now since he's the new ruler. Two, it doesn't really fit with Zoro's theme of having demon/devil type swords and attacks. I can't really imagine him suddenly changing his style to include something heavenly like that sword seems to imply. Three, it's Odin's sword that was left for his daughter. I'm surprised she even let Zoro have Enma, considering how much Wano wanted Shusui back. But I guess if Hiyori, the one it was meant for, was okay with it, who am I to disagree? Alternatively, Zoro could be getting the third and final cursed sword, Kitetsu 1, also called Shodai Kitetsu. This weapon hasn't been shown yet, but following how things are going, Zoro might just stumble upon it in his next major battle. This would be a more likely sword for him, and more aligned with his techniques. Not to mention, it would be extremely useful against the Navy or the world government, because it's said to be the strongest of the series. The Kitetsu swords that followed were considered to have been weaker as more of them were forged. I'm not sure why that is, possibly due to the timeline of when they were made or perhaps who forged them, but that's not what matters. Speaking of weapons, more obviously, Zoro is eventually going to have a full handle of Enma, so it's less likely to drain his life force out. Along with that, perfecting his use of Conqueror's Haki, and the others which he learned from Mihawk, would make him both massively stronger and much harder to take down. As if he isn't already a threat to most people he comes across. But if that isn't enough, Zoro will most definitely aim to forge his blades black through battle, once he has them fully under his control. He's already done it temporarily, which Zoro reflected on during his battle against Yukimaru, but now he could find a way to make it stay black permanently, like Mihawk's sword Yoru. As many theorize, I think this would involve Zoro mastering all the forms of Haki, as well as fully understanding the blade's will and soul. If Zoro succeeds at this, which I have a strong feeling he will, it would be only the third sword in the world to be turned black, that we know of. On a smaller scale, Zoro most likely will advance his usual sword styles, 1 sword, 2 sword, 3 sword, as well as no sword if that ever needed to be used again. And this might be a stretch, but I assume there will be a return of the Grim Reaper from the Enma blade. The most obvious result would be that Zoro has a better understanding and therefore can use it without any drawbacks as I mentioned. But there's also the possibility of something deeper, like Enma making a deal with Zoro so that he's able to call it out physically to use as his visual embodiment of Conqueror's haki. Let me explain. I don't think it could literally fight on his behalf like a stand ability from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but more so that it would represent what is within Zoro and project it outward to intimidate any opponent who's not worthy of fighting him. Now let's consider what might happen if situations turn tricky, which is more than likely going to happen now that the Straw Hats have an even bigger target on their backs. Zoro is a master at improvising, and I think we'll continue to see him use unexpected weapons, like when he used the seppuku blade to take down a criminal because he couldn't use his own swords. And because he's not a Devil Fruit user, Zoro could gain more comfort fighting in or around water as well, such as when he fought in freezing water during the Punk Hazard arc. This could lead him to face opponents that would be difficult for Luffy and the other Devil Fruit users in their crew. On a sillier note, Zoro also has a high tolerance for alcohol and even contaminated food. This seems like nothing, but could point to him being able to survive in very harsh conditions. We know he can survive without eating, but how about sustaining himself on something poisonous? I wouldn't put it past him to want to try something the crew is skeptical about, just to ensure they wouldn't be put in danger either. Would this be useful in a physical battle? Maybe not, but having this kind of survivability would make it harder for anyone trying to torture him with those types of methods. Let's circle back to Wano. There's a very distinct connection between Zoro and the land of the samurai, and I don't just mean because he has swords that were forged by their people. The village Zoro comes from is called Shimotsuki, named after Kozaburo, who left Wano and settled down there. We know that Kozaburo was Kuina's grandfather, which leads us to wonder about Zoro's parentage, and how he got so resilient even before the time skip. When the Wano arc began, Zoro just fit right in. I couldn't imagine a better place for him to settle down when he's older. We'll be hypothesizing about that in a bit. Shimotsuki Ushimaru, the previous ruler of Wano before Orochi took his place, has a very similar look to Zoro. Not only that, but his ancestor, Ryuma, who Zoro got Shisui from, was a one-eyed swordsman who could practically be his twin. Okay, I know you're wondering why I'm saying this. Well, if Zoro is directly linked to them, and especially Ryuma, that would mean his swordsmanship could grow exponentially in the coming arcs. And also that his goal of being the greatest swordsman involves surpassing his own ancestry. Going back to Foxfire style, it's interesting that Zoro picked it up, despite only having seen it being used. This could either be because of his tendency to relate to Wano and their techniques, or because Zoro will eventually gain other types of cutting techniques. For example, he first learned how to cut steel against Mr. One in Alabasta. And from there, he's cut crazier and more surprisingly tough things. Could Zoro learn to cut more intangible things next? Water, air, maybe even lights? Who knows? I think it's definitely a possibility, with how easily he cut through Prometheus so he couldn't save Big Mom. Beyond all of those things, and impossible to ignore, is the fact that Zoro's bounty is going to be raised. Based on the 1058 leaks that recently dropped, it seems like it's going to be above 1 billion. I think later on, he'll eventually pass the 2 billion mark, seeing as Mihawk's is over 3 billion currently. Let's get into what might come further down the road now, including a possible bad ending for our Mosshead. Where he might end up. Briefly, I'd like to touch on some things coming at an unknown time, or maybe not going to happen at all. Firstly, after seeing Shanks use his Conqueror's haki to subdue Marine Admiral Ryokugyu in Wano, I think it's inevitable that we'll see Luffy, and hopefully Zoro, do the same thing against someone of that level. It seems like a very possible occurrence, given how close Zoro is to Luffy and how far he'll go to protect him. But he might do it with his sword instead of just haki, launching a strike from afar like he did in the Dressrosa arc. Aside from that, I am expecting, and praying for, a rematch between Zoro and Fujitora specifically. Why this seems likely is because of both how law-abiding that Blind Admiral is, and because of their common sword usage. Plus, Fujitora didn't go all out against Zoro because of the circumstances with Doflamingo. But if he has to follow a similar order to kill Luffy from the Five Elders, Zoro won't be holding anything back. And with his additional techniques and new sword, I think Fujitora is in for a surprise. If Bastille gets in the way, I doubt he'd last very long. With that out of the way, let's get into the juicy endings that could await Zoro and the crew. Some of these might be really out there, like Zoro dying, and others I'm sure you've heard or seen elsewhere as they're more predictable. Possible endings. Dreams Come True ending. With the revelation of Buggy's Cross-Guild Alliance and how it's used to put bounties on marine or other non-pirate targets, I assume, it seems likely that at the very least the Straw Hats will run into them. With that, Zoro may have to face off against his teacher. If not to save someone, then just to prove he's gotten strong enough to surpass him. If their encounter is just to demonstrate Zoro's the best swordsman in the world and take his title, I predict it will be before the One Piece is found. Also, it would be a dream come true for us to get a flashback to his training, or more in-depth info on how Zoro got so many scars during those 2 years. Following this sword battle of epic proportions, I see Zoro being content for a short while at least, and able to focus on helping Luffy become the king of the pirates. Ideally, as we draw closer and closer to the end of the series as a whole, we'll have members of the crew finally fulfill their wildest dreams and aspirations prior to Luffy's final ascension. Zoro's new home ending. Another possibility, which would be related to Shimotsuki and Wano, is Zoro finding his way back to the land of the samurai. If anything, I could see this happening after he helps Luffy reach his goal first, as well as his own, of course. Or maybe, by that point, Momo will have opened Wano's borders to the world, thanks to whatever Joy Boy accomplishes, and Zoro could use that momentum and excitement to reach his goal by waiting for challengers there. It doesn't seem like strong swordsmen tend to go out looking for competition, though. They usually wait for someone to come to them. Regardless, this ending would involve Zoro returning to Wano. Once there, I think he could easily become a protector for their country, or perhaps even a representative of their techniques. With time, Zoro could even decide to learn the art of forging swords and make his own, following the path of Shimotsuki. The main reason I think Zoro might go back to Wano is because of his recent discovery of the connection between his village and them. It doesn't hurt that one of his swords comes from Sukiyaki Kozuki, Odin's father. I'm sure Zoro's interest in swords would lead him back to a place like that, if only to get a better grasp of the history. Straw Hat's Forever ending. With the title of the strongest swordsman, Zoro could decide to continue sailing the world to try and find new and exciting techniques and challengers. Similarly, the Straw Hats could stay together as a crew, after reaching the One Piece and achieving all their own dreams. This scenario would have them following in the footsteps of pirates like Whitebeard, who continued his journey for many long years with a fleet. This would reflect Oda's good timeline version of Zoro's life in his 40s and 60s, where he becomes a master swordsman of 4 and 5 sword style, continuing to add more difficulty to his sword techniques. And of course, more blades. He probably would have gained some more scars too. These drawings were released a number of years ago though, so maybe Oda has changed Zoro's fate, and he'll just stick to his 3-sword style after all. I think it could be fun to see him add a sword every decade, trying to figure out how to balance more and more sharp objects. Who knows, he might even create a 9-sword style that involves swinging 9 blades simultaneously. Open ending. On the flip side, it's possible none of the Straw Hats' goals are reached by the end of the series, except Luffy's, because he's the main focus of the story and leads their crew. Perhaps once they reach Laugh Tale and find the One Piece, then and only then will they focus on their own dreams. In that case, Zoro would break away to face his master and anyone else along the way who poses a challenge. An ending like that would leave some people disappointed, I'm sure, but it's not impossible. All we know for certain is that Luffy is going to become the king of the pirates. Probably. Terrible, horrible, no good, very bad ending. In a worst-case scenario, and I mean really, really dark, Zoro would absolutely offer his own life to protect Luffy or the other Straw Hats. I doubt Luffy would want to go through another execution war the way he did trying to save Ace. But if Zoro were to reach that decision, then it would mean that the Rubber Man wouldn't be able to fight back in some way due to being grievously injured or captured already. I offer this as a possibility only because of his close bond with Luffy, who he recently admitted was his best friend, and because of how he was willing to risk his life by taking on all of his captain's pain while facing Kuma. Another example of Zoro's sacrificial attitude is how he was willing to spend every last ounce of his energy to save Luffy from Kaido, preparing to bash his head in. Let's say Zoro gave himself up to protect the crew. I don't think anyone would just stand by and watch him be publicly executed. At the very least, they would all make their way to the Navy HQ or wherever he's being held to try and free him. I'm assuming this would happen before reaching Laugh Tale. Not that I think this is a likely outcome, and that the journey to the final island would be tinged with sadness, either because Zoro died or because he couldn't join them all the way to the final destination. It would also greatly impede his own dream of becoming the greatest swordsman alive. Let's pretend this ending doesn't exist, shall we? Grandpa ending. Our final outcome, and furthest into the future, would involve a retired Zoro who fought his way successfully to Laugh Tale, became the swordsman he always wanted to be, and found someone to settle down with. Now, I know this ending sounds similar to the Wano one, but trust me, it isn't. In this version, Zoro would return to his village in the East Blue, stronger and more knowledgeable than ever. With a wife and kids, Zoro could enjoy peacefully drinking and planning what to do with his free time. He might get some invitations to showcase his sword prowess and demonstrate why he holds the title of strongest as well. But mostly, Zoro would be focused on bettering the village that Shimotsuki established, possibly even teaching the younger generation his sword techniques. I can't imagine he'd give anyone Kuina's sword, but he would likely hand over his other two weapons to his children if they showed any interest in them. This could also be considered one of the best endings for our one-eyed hothead. And on that note, we've reached the end of speculation territory. Was there anything you agreed or disagreed with? Let us know in the comments below. As always, I'm Jack Stansbury, and I hope you have a great day.